Ladies and gentlemen, what a lovely name. Polite applause. Yes, yes. We thought we'd give a fancy name to something that we are very, very excited about, which is the world of advertising and marketing. We thought that we love things and then we ask ourselves why we love those things. And usually it's the marketing mavens who have the answers. And today we are very, very honored to have the wonderful, wonderful Hari Krishnan with us. Hari Krishnan, of course, not too much. He just heads content for the whole of Publicis Groupe, which happens to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest advertising / media management group in the world. Hari, what a modest little way to introduce you, know.
I want to say that I'm delighted, but
yes, it's you work long and hard. 3 decades is not a small time, or to be for a nuke to be cocked at, so to speak. But listen, you're here because we thought we'd ask you a few of the questions about things that are making us go, ooh, that looks nice. And
sure, shoot, yeah.
So one of the things that, of course, that's happening, of course, the Pepsi campaign, the whole Tu Tera Kar.
Oh yes, Rise Up Baby. Yeah.
So that's the new one, and Pepsi, of course, comes from a very, very illustrious advertising background. In India itself, from getting Sachin Tendulkar to actually appear for one of the first times in advertising campaigns, to lines like "Ye Dil Mange More," which actually had become iconic during the Kargil conflict. It's a heavy burden.
Yes.
It's a heavy burden to carry, and now there's a new one, and they've got some iconic names to be associated with it as well. There's Samantha Ruth Prabhu, there's Yash, there's of course Ranveer Singh as well. So what do you think? I mean, how does this happen? What are the mechanics, Hari?
So Pepsi as a brand has always been, while it appears young and fresh every time it comes out with a story or presents a point of view. What you can observe is that Pepsi has forever been the voice of the youth. And whether all the lines that you just spoke about, "Ye Dil Mange More" or "Mera Number Kab Aayega," all of these are very deeply seeded in the sentiment of the youth of society. In this case, of course, we are talking about India, and it's not just India. If you look at across the world, Rise of the New Generation was globally what was seeded when the brand came for a very big relaunch back in 1984. So that's a tradition that they've been following.
Sure.
And every time they come up with something that is right sitting in the hearts of the youth, and they're able to articulate it and give it out in such a simple way that anyone can mouth it.
It's also very delicious irony that Tu Tera Kar literally means be yourself, and Rise Up Baby is basically being individualistic in a society where everyone needs an iPhone and everyone needs to wear Jordans to feel unique. It's the whole thing about you're unique like everyone else, but individuality seems to be something that they're underlining even while mass producing a drink. So that willing suspension of disbelief, is it hard to get?
See, it's a balance that every marketer tries to achieve. The reason is that what you're talking about is a very popular sentiment, so it has to cut across a wide cross section of people. At the same time, you've got to make that person feel that it is coming from his unique voice. So that's a very big, and some of the best marketers, and of course Pepsi as a brand has seen some of the best marketing people,
of course,
who've kind of led it from the front. And we still see that work coming out.
Absolutely.
And so that's that's a clear way of saying that every time you watch something, and even if it's something that resonates with everybody, you also feel that it is uniquely touching your chord. That's the beauty of it.
That's the cracking of the code, and that's what makes it so fascinating to try and see how that happens, the mechanics of it all. Tell us, how does you have 30 years of experience? So I'm assuming that when you started, it was all analog and pencils and papers, lots of them being torn up and thrown at each other. I'm assuming in the do you have like a war room or something like that where you all sit together? How do these lines come up?
It's quite interesting that although it looks like a very simple line, all these lines that we talk about, like in this case, there is Rise Up Baby and Tu Tera Kar, and I'm sure a lot of imagination and creativity has gone into it. Similarly, back in my day, we had a whole lot of advertising punchlines, as normal people call it, or baselines, like "Dar ke aage jeet hai," or "Ye dil mange more," which is the classic Pepsi line.
Of course.
A lot of people think that it's done by just one person, while of course the crafting is ultimately done by one or two people, but there's a whole lot of input that goes into it. What you see as a line is an outcome of several strategic and creative inputs that have gone into it. A lot of sweat, a lot of blood.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, we've had war rooms. We've had war rooms which are decorated, and people put up stuff there for inspiration.
So give us concrete examples, Hari. For example, like for a Pepsi, what would a hypothetical brief be like? Would there be a character attached to the thing? Would there be like, this is what we want? What is a classic brief like?
So I think the classic brief for Pepsi that has always been, and I'm sure even after seeing this work, I can kind of backwork that, is the proverbial underdog. And sometimes the best briefs for this kind of work is just a single line in which you can capture the person who you are targeting, and what that person has in his or her heart, what we call the insight. Usually people use this word very loosely, called insights, but there are truths and there are insights, because insight is what is called the hidden truth.
Right.
And in this case, and in Pepsi's case, it has always been the rise of the underdog.
Sure.
It's always been the person who's been kept away, who hasn't had it easy, who has always been up against a lot of challenges, whether the challenges are in the form of conventions. Now by conventions I mean I could mean various aspects of life. It could be how society views him if he or she do not perform well in studies.
But how do you choose that celebrity bit? Because Pepsi's been strong on celebrity ever since they entered.
That's right. So I again go back to the proverbial underdog definition. And you have at any point of time celebrities or idols who are rising from below.
Like for Ranveer Singh, they've said that, oh, ye to Joker hai, and all them.
Exactly. So he sticks out like a sore thumb. Doesn't quite subscribe to convention. If you look at Samantha, she's also somebody who sticks out, and she doesn't subscribe to convention. So through the history of Pepsi, their choice of celebrities has always been to look for the underdog in the.
Really, I mean, some iconic ads. I mean, there's been Ye Dil Mange More. There's been, which of course, as we said, the Kargil conflict sort of took to another level altogether.
That's right.
But it all started with Yahi Hai Right Choice Baby, where there was the use of Remo Fernandez as a singer. There was that whole funky urban, openly urban feeling, wasn't it? I mean, at that point of time, that was everyone hesitated a little in that, didn't they?
Yeah. So I think what you're missing out is Juhi Chawla in that commercial.
Oh yes.
And I'll tell you why it's significant, because we are talking about the launch of Pepsi 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, maybe even older. I think it was 1990. And you're talking about a cultural phenomena that was reflected in that commercial, and that actually came out in those words, Yahi Hai Right Choice. If you understand one thing, in those days, the youth did not have much of a choice. India was still reeling under a huge unemployment scenario.
Sure.
People used to just either opt for a career as a doctor or engineer or an IAS.
Yeah.
And if you're none of these three, then you're pretty much doomed.
Sure.
It's not like what it's today, that you have a lot of opportunities. And the other big thing, which means there was no choice for people. And the other big thing that you notice in the very first commercial, and I'm sure your audience can go to YouTube and look for that, in case they weren't born then, like us, is this whole duality of the Indian youth. So Remo Fernandez represented the more urbane, the more westernized, the more global symbol of what the Indian youth aspired to be.
Sure.
And Juhi Chawla represented in her beautiful salwar kameez costume and her Kathak,
Yeah.
performance in that ad, the Indianness and the ethos of what is what we represent otherwise, and what the Indian youth at that point of time was finding very hard to resolve was this dual identity. Hey, I am inherently Indian, but I am also global. How do I resolve that conundrum? How do I resolve that conflict?
Sure.
And usually the choice you get is, hey, you're either A or you're B. It's a binary. It's really the illusion of choice. You really don't have a choice. And actually the choice is the third choice is, can I be both?
That's, yeah.
And that's what Pepsi came and said. And that's what struck at the hearts of the people.
And that's the thing about advertising. No, people think it's shallow, it's all cool and glamour and etc. But there is just such an intrinsic social aspect to it as well, because you literally have to be a bit of a
sociologist,
social engineer.
So a lot of my experience has been with ad agencies where they. A lot of people call themselves cultural anthropologists.
Oh!
But that's fine.
Trust advertisers. Yeah, okay.
Look, you just belittled us. But but the fact is, it takes a lot of cultural anthropology to go deep down into the psyche of the people and actually say, hey, you're giving me an illusion of choice.
Yeah.
You're not giving me a real choice. And that's the choice of the new generation that Pepsi represented in those days.
And it came out with the with the sweet pill of glamour, but it was actually a bitter pill that was being
being coated.
Yeah.
And of course it was a massive grand scale of things. If you remember that commercial,
Yeah.
there was a huge stadium and both Remo and Juhi doing a Jugalbandi.
Yeah.
It's unforgettable.
Absolutely. And that was the thing about scale, no? It was all shot real time. There was no CG, and this was all the whole orchestra and the dancers coming in. It was a spectacle.
It was very organic. It was very analog, as you say. And of course, it was a spectacle. It was a theater. It was performance in those
And yet
days.
people tend to dismiss advertising as something. Really, you know? Does that hurt sometimes?
Well, it does, but then you also know that most people they say that because they can't be in that. And, it is, of course, one of it. It continues to be, especially when we see work like this, Rise Up Baby, coming out.
Yeah.
It continues to be one of the most aspirational professions that one got into.
That's why it is just such an inestimable pleasure to talk to a wordsmith. The subtlety of that shade was connoisseur-like. It tasted so lovely. You've been telling us some fascinating stories online, some of offline, some of which, of course, we cannot tell people. That is only for us. But there is the fascinating story that you told us about the rise of Pepsi in the 70s and the 80s. You want to tell us that, Hari? Hari, of course, head of content for Publicis Groupe and today's expert, and so honored to have him. Tell us the story, Hari.
Oh, first of all, thanks for this honor. and the underdog, it's just something that always fascinates me. And if you look at all the choices that Pepsi has made in terms of who represents them in a certain market or in a certain society, they've always chosen people who've risen from nothing. And if you actually go back a few decades and really analyze the history of Pepsi right from its inception in the 20s, perhaps many people don't know that it used to be the cola for the blacks in America, and it was also called the kitchen cola because its immediate rival was the very popular and a much older brand, and Pepsi came in with a very big price advantage in those days, that it made it appealing for the working class to have it, and clearly it got kind of slotted to that market. But the real iconic status of Pepsi that we see today was actually propelled by that one big underdog that you and I love.
Yes.
And as Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. That's the one.
That's the one. And back in the 80s, in fact, there's this fascinating story about how Michael Jackson, one of the youngest brothers of the Jackson 5, was signed up for Pepsi endorsements. In fact, much of the Pepsi songs that you hear, and even the choice of the new generation, was inspired and written by Michael Jackson.
Wow.
In one of his songs. And go to YouTube, all of that. The fascinating thing about the internet is, everything's there.
It's forever. Yeah.
And you just have to look for it. And Michael Jackson really represented that underdog. And if you look at the 80s, when Michael Jackson won 8 Grammys in 1984, you and I perhaps watched it on Doordarshan.
Absolutely.
And that's the time when the whole and he made it universal.
Sure.
He was not just America's underdog. He was the world's underdog, and he gave music and pop culture and youth culture a new language and a new lighthouse to look at.
For sure.
And that's Pepsi kind of benefited hugely from the rise of Michael Jackson, and they both mirrored each other in a sense.
And that's why we thought we'd tell you this story, because music and advertising, I tell you, sometimes we forget how big an influence music has been in the world of advertising, in the world of fashion. There were people who influenced the way a whole generation dressed, and as we can now see, how a whole generation wanted to be viewed. But what we'd like from you, of course, Hari, before we let you go into a very stressful environment of your work, is since we're living in the world of social media, it's only proper that we ask you for a listicle of what makes a campaign great. 3 to 5 points on what makes a campaign great.
Oh wow, those points are right now flashing in my head, Sarthak.
Lovely.
So I think what makes a campaign great and what makes a brand great is the fact that it's got to be rooted in some kind of cultural insight. In this case, as you see, Rise Up is all about society and culture resonating with the fact that people want to come out of their inadequacies. People want to shine. So that's point number one, which is rooted in a very deep cultural insight that is palpable in society and that everyone's kind of feeling. The second big thing is the brand has to give the person a voice. See, you and I have a voice. You, of course, have a wonderful voice.
Yeah.
But of course, 90% of people have thoughts and they don't know how to express themselves. I think some of the best brand work and some of the best campaigns have come out of statements that reside in people's hearts, but they are unable to say it in 2 or 3 pithy words. And that's what great brands do. In this case, Rise Up, or you could look at any other great piece of advertising. Sure. There is a human truth beyond the product truth that the brand talks about, right? And of course, the third thing is people who represent the brand have to really stand for that value, in which, in this case, the rise of the underdogs. We've spoken about so many people. We've seen in India so many cricketers and cinema personalities have represented the face of a great brand.
Of course.
And of course, the fact that the brand has to be always current, while it is talking something which is eternal. Which has always been the same thing, whether it was choice of the new generation or it was Ye Dil Mange More. We're talking about a brand in India itself which is 3 decades in the making.
Absolutely.
But the way it comes out with its message, as we can see with all these people, is the freshness and the currency of what is going on currently, which kind of appeals to the youngest person possible.
Absolutely. And it's the balancing of the dichotomies that makes this field so fascinating. And for having broken it down for us in such a wonderfully accessible way, we'd like to thank you very, very much, Hari. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Sarthak. It's always been my dream to be on a radio show, and you've made it come alive today, man.
Hari, yeah, it is our honor. And before the doors of this Mutual Appreciation Society open wider, we shall head to a break and come right back right here on 94.3 Radio 1. Stay with us.